My name is Samira. I am a Somali British commissioner at Netflix, and this is Aamna. But today, you guys will get to know her as Shay, Amina, and Aamna. Throughout the event, we will be discussing her book, Scattered. Round of applause, come on. So, Aamna is a woman who has lived half her life as a stateless Somali refugee and half as a British citizen, the author of Scattered. So, to start, how are you arriving today?
I'm very nervous, so thank you all for coming. I was really astonished when I heard how many people were going to come to support this launch, but I shouldn't be. Like, the Somali community is just such a formidable force and always comes out for us. So thank you so much to everyone. I'm absolutely, slightly overwhelmed, but so overjoyed with the positive response I've had to the book so far. So thank you.
Amazing. Well, hopefully we can quash those nerves. I'm also nervous and I will stumble, so don't worry, we'll be nervous together. And let's start with, why did you decide to write this book and why now?
So I'm a reporter at The Guardian. I'm the community affairs correspondent, which is just quite a Guardian way of saying I cover race and inequality. Just before I got that role, I was covering the Black Lives Matter protest in the summer of 2020, and I just felt really struck while I was at one of the protests where I saw so many young people calling for our ability to reclaim our history and calling for our own voices and our own narratives. There was a sign that said, Black history is British history, and also just that yearning from so many young people for those of us a little bit older to really get our foot in the gear and start saying what kind of our history is, our stories are. So it was really from there that I realised, okay, I think I have a story to tell. Seeing their bravery really gave me the confidence to go and tell it.
That's amazing. And obviously you're a reporter, so words are your kind of first port of call, right? Pen to paper, you're like, yes. But how did you decide that it was going to be a memoir? Did you think, I could do this as maybe an article, an exploration piece, or a documentary? How did you land on being a book?
It was quite easy. I'm not very gifted in anything else. So
I'm not sure that's true.
So that was quite a simple decision to write. I think to write a memoir wasn't something that I set out to do initially. I kind of wanted to write a almost socio-political history of the Somali Civil War, definitely both a politics and history nerd, and I was in the library for those first few months when I was really interested in writing this book, just looking at how we led to that situation, what the breakdown that led to the war was, and then I was telling a really good friend of mine, Gary Younge, about wanting to write this book, and at the same time, I was telling him my own personal history and my family's personal history, and he just burst out laughing because he said, why the hell wouldn't you write that first? And, in telling your story and your parents' story, you will be telling one important story about Somalia and what happened in the war and the refugee crisis that followed. So initially, I was a bit too shy to say, I'm writing a memoir. And I mean, that's quite embarrassing to do that at the age of 28 when I set out to do this. Hopefully I have a very long life ahead of me, inshallah. But yeah, but especially talking to my parents, I realised I need to not shy away from the I. I'm a news reporter, and I don't really centre myself in my reporting. I really love talking to other people and figuring out their stories, especially in school. One of the only things I really got into trouble with that is constantly gossiping with everyone. So that's essentially what my job is now, so it's fabulous. But yeah, that's when I realised, maybe I can centre myself in this moment. But it wasn't easy. My editor, Allegra from Bloomsbury, who's amazing, kind of spent the first almost year and a half of working on this book together, constantly trying to drag me out into the narrative. I'd be quoting other people or quoting, newspaper articles at the time, or and she's like, well, what happened to you, or what do you think about this situation? And it was constantly trying to draw me out. So it wasn't a very comfortable thing to do, writing a memoir. But I'm so glad I did it. At the end, I feel changed and transformed as a person.
Wow. And I was blessed to get the book in advance, and I read it, and you can really see that struggle of pulling you out. And what's fascinating is you do this thing where you oh my God, I'm talking to my parents, and they are the point of view, and you're I'm going to speak to my parents, I'm going to get their story, and then you go into war and the politics behind it, and then all of a sudden there's a point which you guys will read, and where you turn and you start to talk about yourself and I mentioned at the beginning, there's a number of names you go by: Shay Shay, Amina, and now Aamna. Would love to kind of discover at what point, when you started using these names and those identities, how did you go into those characters and write the book, or did you write from your perspective now and kind of tell the story backwards?
Oh, that's a really good question. It's so interesting because if you're not aware, nicknames are so common in the Somali community, even in certain identity card in Mogadishu, you have your nickname on the card as well, and often they're not exactly the most pleasant things about you. So I love that about us. And there's this saying that's someone that has many names is a really well-loved person. And it was quite lucky that I had all these different names in my life because they ended up representing that moment in my life. When I went to, so for example, I was born Amina. It was changed slightly to Aamna once I kind of came to here. It got anglicised and kind of lived as that for so long. I didn't really, hiya, buddy. That's my son, Ismail. And it got anglicised and I just kind of ran with it. It wasn't really until writing the book that I thought about the name that I had been given and that I was born with, and what does it represent to have kind of been separated from that. It was quite a difficult exploration. I was very uncomfortable with it, if I have to be honest, because something that I'm really honest in the book is I really excised my Somali identity from my life when I came here. I didn't really, I struggled to see many positive things about coming from Somalia when I associated it so much with the death and destructions that I had seen and the refugee camp that I had grown up in. So kind of saying goodbye to Amina was almost the easiest thing in the world to do as a kid. So the book in itself was a way of kind of coming back to that. And as part of the book, one thing that I actually did was I asked all my friends, could you please call me Amina for a bit? And they're so lovely. They immediately, changed their names on their phone contact books. And then I sat with that and I was being called Amina again, but it really just felt like a piece of clothing that I had outgrown. It's not something I felt like I could... it didn't feel like it fit me anymore, so I felt really lost then because I felt, okay, I don't think I'm Amina anymore. Am I denying my Somali self if I continue being Aamna? I don't know if I've got an answer to that yet. The book is an attempt at just asking myself the question, but I'm going to be wrestling with that for the rest of my life, and I think that's just a hangover of what displacement does, is constantly asking, who was I before? Who would I have been if this war didn't happen, if I hadn't become a refugee? Who am I now, and how can I still kind of honour the person and the kid that I was, honour my people and the country I come from, but then also just be who I am now? So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because to be vulnerable on a stage, firstly to be vulnerable in a book, which you really have been in this book, and you struck a chord with me because, again, being Somali and having come here very similar circumstances to you, I also have two names, and I have my Somali name, which nobody knows other than my family, and I have my British name, which is Samira. And when people call me my Somali name, and I'm like, who the hell that? Who there? Like, no one. Like, and it's really interesting because you are right, because you also get sucked into that space of like, oh, who is that person and who is that identity? And also like what pain is with that person. And that's really brave of you to say, and obviously you don't need me to tell you that, but it is really brave of you to actually identify that, like, Aamna was, in your words, undocumented and really struggling to grapple with who she was, and carried a lot of that trauma from the war and the journey that you took from Somalia to the UK. And Aamna was a rebirth in a way.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful way to put it. I'm almost astonished at the amount of pain I carried as a child, and the pain that a lot of refugees carry, but then also I think the strength to just bounce back that quickly. I think it's actually so much easier to do as a child. I've got so much like love and admiration, particularly for my parents, my mum, my aunties who are here today, just because to be able to give up everything that I know now as an adult in my 30s, I can't even imagine doing that. You know, you can rebound so much quicker as a child. You pick up the language quicker, you pick up the accent. You know, I was able to very quickly integrate to this country. But yeah, I can't imagine those who do it as an adult and make that decision as an adult.
Completely. And we talked a little bit about, obviously, like, you struggled with the start of it, like, you know, your point of view, but now the book is out. Like, what has it done for you, and like, how does it feel that your story is now being able to be read by thousands and millions of people, hopefully, across the world?
Ooh, it's two things. One, absolutely terrifying. Obviously, it's one thing to just kind of be writing in your own notebook and going through your own personal journey by yourself. But the response I've had, the emails I've been having from people, particularly just other Somalis coming up to me to say, I have this idea, I'm thinking about doing this, or I think I want to do this short film, or I think I want to write this novel. And weirdly, them turning to me to give that permission is a responsibility I'm absolutely terrified to have. I've obviously always tell them, you know, I write in the first chapter, I had to give myself permission to write this book. But if I'm able to, you know, kick someone in the right direction on that journey, I feel incredibly proud. So yeah, if it doesn't sound too big-headed, I feel very proud of myself.
Well done. No, you should do. Like, you know, at the end of the day, like, please, round of applause. Go ahead. And there is something really beautiful about that journey, right? Like, writing, and as somebody who is in that craft, but not books, but film and TV, like, you give a part of yourself in that. You give a part of yourself to every creative path that you do. But let's talk about someone that you haven't mentioned, which you keep shimmying around, Shay Shay. Like, tell me a bit about Shay Shay and her journey in the book.
Yeah, so it's Shay Shay.
Oh, damn.
My mum knows, yeah. And I don't know how I got the nickname Shay Shay, but it was definitely in the Kakuma refugee camp, and there was another really lovely man who lived in an encampment right next to us, who would say, Shay Shay Mia, and then like I would just apparently just like strut into the room like I was danced my way into pretty much that's pretty much stayed the same, but yeah, just made my presence known as I've come into a space. And I loved kind of interacting and getting stories about Shay Shay and who she was, because you see this picture of me and people have talked about, such a cute picture, but there's something quite haunting about my eyes in that picture. And it's just after I've left the camp, and it, particularly someone who's just become a mum now, it's quite shocking actually to see someone that young going through those feelings. But by kind of interacting with what was Shay Shay like, what were those memories like, and trying to reach back to those memories, what has really come out of it was I was a really happy kid. I was just really like lucky. My parents and my mum particularly kind of went out of her way to create this really happy environment in a refugee camp, and I think that really speaks to the testament of mothers everywhere. But I just so kind of hilariously quite unbothered by what was going around me. So even though there was a lot of there was quite significant trauma and pain there, what mostly came out of going back to who Shay was just huge strength and resilience. And it's quite nice to remind yourself of that sometimes. I think particularly as you're going through life and you can feel very anxious and overwhelmed. You might not have survived something as intense as this, but just to think, yeah, I have survived and I can go forward and I can keep going. That was the main takeaway of going back to Shay there.
Yay! Oh, thank you. And it's something fun about the nicknames in Somali culture. Sometimes they're like, why am I named that? But some of them are empowering. They're not disempowering. And I actually called my mum because I was like, Mum, what was my nickname? And she said, you didn't have one. I said, why not? And she said, well, you came to the UK and we wanted you to assimilate as quickly as possible, so we didn't. I feel quite sad. I wish I got a nickname. Imagine Shay. Am I saying it right now?
Yes. Yeah. I think nicknames are just hilarious. Sorry, Mum, I'm going to say yours. So my mum is called Fatima John, or just John. Because apparently there was a Kenyan man in the village that she grew up with. She was rather curious about him as a kid, so just got that nickname forever, John. So whenever people are calling her, they're like, is John at home? My mum's coming out. So I just find that quite fascinating.
Yeah. That's amazing. My brother's nickname is Ilkasa, which is red teeth, because he had red teeth. And I was like, that's not a good thing, guys. They're like, it is. It's, everyone knows who he is. I was like, alrighty then. There is joy in so much of being Somali. That's the thing which I really picked up in the book. And I'd love to kind of touch upon that. The way we, as the Somali community, use humour to dissolve some of the pain, really. But also, we really do fight for what we believe in.
Yeah.
Sometimes not in a good way, but we are also forever optimists. And I'd love to kind of pick your brain about how you brought that across in the book and why that was important for you.
Definitely. One of the first things I said to Bloomsbury when they bought the book was I actually have no interest in writing a misery memoir, because that isn't who I am, and that's not who my family is, and that's not who the Somali people are. I'm interested in writing a book about family, about community, about war and displacement, yes, but also about love, humour and resilience. And I'm so glad they understood that, because we've just got such a dark sense of humour. I really wanted that to shine through. So much of the audio of my parents' interviews I actually can't show anyone, because we are laughing about the most insane and ridiculous things. We're laughing about just some of the really traumatic things that they'd been through. And I come across as quite awful in that recording, because, it's my dad telling me, this guy was taking me away, he was about to shoot me, and, he thought I was part of this warring tribe, and I'm just cackling in that recording because of the way he's telling me it, and the way he's laughing about it too. And it might be so strange to hear that, but there's such power in being able to laugh about really difficult memories like that. I just feel like in that laughter, you're just letting the pain go. So the resilience of the Somali community, that's just not really borne out in the media portrayal of us.
I think that's a really good point in terms of the portrayal of who we are. But I wanted to ask you a question. Do you think we've actually lost some of that in ourselves because of our dual identities? Obviously, you've been able to travel through a couple of different countries before coming to the UK, but the second half of your life, we've been predominantly in the UK and a British citizen. So for me, it's do you think we conceal a lot of our dark humour and wittiness and the nicknames and the essence, and also the fact that we are very optimistic? Do you think we conceal that now because of our dual identities, or?
Yeah, I'm not sure if we conceal it, because I think it's one of the first things that you come across when you meet Somali people. It's almost, we're not really given the opportunities to showcase it. I think, particularly as someone who works for a mainstream British newspaper, so I work for The Guardian, but I've worked in the British press for nearly 10 years now, I can say with confidence that the majority of the British press will lap up a really negative or sad story from the black and minority ethnic community, particularly Somalis. But if we go and try to pitch a story that's, this is a really amazing play that these Somali playwrights have done, or this is a really great stand-up comedy show that this TikTok Somali person is doing, just speaks to, we really fight to have it. And we've had those stories, for example, in The Guardian. But you do have to fight, it's not something that's considered newsworthy. It's not something that people want or find really interesting. It's, I don't know if that's our fault, I think there are people in the industry trying really, really hard to showcase this other side. And actually, I'd say the majority of British Somali journalists I know are quite sick of writing on the other side. I'm like one of the few that's like, no, it's still really important. We've got to keep writing about the difficulties in our community. But there's so much people, just looking at, my former colleague Hibak, who's at the New York Times now, she's worked so hard to get really brilliant and positive stories of Somalis in the UK, but she'd probably agree it's a struggle.
It's interesting because it's like, why is it a struggle? Like, that's my question. It's like, why is seeing a community beyond the lens of war hard for journalists? Does it not sell? Is that really what?
I think that's one of the main things. I think it's not just, I would say, it's not a struggle just for our community. I think I've been thinking about this a lot, particularly right now. I'm on maternity leave, so I'm just a consumer of news. I'm not writing it. And I have been taken back by just how awful the news is all the time. When you're in actually work, you've just got one or two stories that you're working on that week, and often you don't have time to sit back and look at the whole newspaper. Now that I do, I'm just like, this is miserable. And I've known personally, I'm one of the reporters that really tries to get like what we call joy stories in, and I really enjoy writing them, but I'm more likely to have a front page story if it's a hard-hitting news story. And if you want to make a name for yourself in this industry, you want, your story on that front page. You want to be on the 6 o'clock news with the BBC. You're just really unlikely to be if it's this really cool writer's got a book out, this playwright, this comedian. So I think is what we value as news in this country. But that I can only speak as news, and I'd love to hear your perspective as someone in Netflix and focusing on the more fiction side of things.
So I don't speak for all of Netflix, just I am not getting in trouble, guys. And I work in scripted series, so it's a very specific kind of niche area that I work in. And I work in IPs and buying books, which is very interesting for us. For me, my focus is always going to be like big spectacle events, and that isn't in our community right now. But there are people who are looking, I can say there are people who are looking for uplifting, heartfelt stories from different communities that aren't just, I would say, like the white community. So I don't speak for all of Netflix, but internally with my colleagues, I do think there is a space that they do want to portray, but also, no offense, but if you guys buy it, they're going to keep making it. So if you guys should all buy this book, and then there'll be more books like that. And I just want to shout out Dixie Days, because Cade had a huge hand in it as well. They have sold out all of the Raw Core, every single show they've done. And that's the power of the Somali dollar. And I think we need to understand that you guys have a huge impact on what gets put on. If they keep getting sold out, they will keep putting it on. So that's an incredible play about 5 young ladies who have done an incredible job putting this play all around the world, all around the UK. And that's really what's important. So your money matters, so use it wisely is my advice. Great. So let's talk about, we talked about Britishness, right? And the impact of what that looks like for both of us. And I'd love to know how, because we spoke briefly beforehand, like the British experience and the Black African American experience influenced your identities and who you are now.
Yeah. So particularly growing up in London in the noughties, there just wasn't that much Black British culture on the TV or in books compared to what we see now, which is just incredible. And so I would be watching a lot of like Black African-American TV shows like Moesha or 101 and kind of really drawing what my understanding of blackness was from there. So there wasn't that much Black British, let alone British Somali culture that I was really interacting with. There's just like flashbacks to me as an 11-year-old trying to like really learn grime lyrics so I can have some semblance of coolness in my school. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. But
I was there too, don't worry. I tried rap and I was like, I can't do this.
But we begin to really see the explosion of grime and begin to see the explosion of Black British rap at the time where I'm a preteen. And that's when I begin to really, it's a music genre that I love, and I begin to feel a real ownership of that kind of British identity when I see it through the lens of being Black British. I think before then, I've got a chapter of this in my book about growing up in Barking. This was an era where the BNP had about 12 councillors in. Nick Griffin was running in our area in 2010. We had EDL marches on a regular basis. So just as I felt like I found a home and a place that I can really begin to build a life for myself, you had really angry group that were telling us, go back home, you don't belong here. So I just saw them waving English flags. So I thought, okay, that's got nothing to do with me then. So it was really once I began to see Black British culture that I thought, oh, okay, maybe I do belong in this country, or maybe there is something for me here. And then we begin to see real explosions of Somali poets and writers. I'm a huge fan of Nadifa, who was shortlisted for the Booker Prize a few years ago, and Warsan, when she was featured in the Beyonce music videos. I almost fell off my couch in shock and joy. But those just weren't a thing that was happening in the late 90s and early noughties. Now, particularly coming back from Mogadishu, I feel so happy being part of this Black British and British Somali canon. I think it's such an amazing and beautiful literary canon. You're seeing the mixture of both the poetry and the lyricism of Somali culture and literature with what we've learned and how we've made a home for ourselves here in the UK. Just the combination of both. I think we're going to see a lot more British Somali writers and poets ending up on those kind of awards and on our screens.
Amazing. That sounds very promising. It's our generation to keep going, right? We spoke about briefly reading an extract from your book.
Yes.
Are we ready for that? Okay.
Yes.
Here you go. I will give you
perfect.
for you, darling.
Brilliant. Okay. So this is an extract I've read before, but it's just my absolute favourite one. It's chapter 7 in the second part of the book, where I returned to Mogadishu after nearly 3 decades. My father, who couldn't be here today, but he sends his love, is waiting for me at a hotel. So yeah. I almost don't recognise my dad when the car stops beside a hotel in a shopping mall. He stands on the pavement and waves at us. He has been in Mogadishu for a month now, returning as he always does for business and for his soul. He looks younger than I have seen him in decades. He wears a pink shirt, white linen trousers and sunglasses. He looks happy. I jump out of the car. We stand and stare at each other for a moment. We don't hug, just smile at each other, laughing. We don't say a word as I walk towards him and let what is left unsaid settle between us. I, Aamna Mohdin, stand beside Mohammed Mohdin Noor. Here he is with his eldest child, his only daughter, in the city he was born in and once called home. In American Vietnamese writer Viet Thanh Nguyen's debut novel, The Sympathizer, the anonymous main character who flees Vietnam following the fall of Saigon talks of a refugee's ability to time travel, because it is time, not space, that defines a refugee. While the distance to return to our lost country was far but finite, the number of years it would take to close the distance was potentially infinite. Refugees everywhere ask themselves the same question: when can we return? Seeing my father for the first time in Mogadishu made me realise that my dad too lives in 2 time zones, the man he was in Somalia in the early 90s and the father he is in London now. Like Gwen's narrator, he occupies the here and there the present and the past. He is, like refugees before him, like refugees to come, a reluctant time traveller. This is where my thoughts turn, as Baba and I stand facing each other on the same stretch of road he had once walked on, as he made preparations for my birth and the arrival to this city. As we walk side by side that morning, falling into step with each other, he says what he's been waiting 3 decades to tell me. Welcome to Somalia. Welcome to Mogadishu. Welcome, finally, home.
That gave me goosebumps, and I have no questions for a second. Wow, what an incredible passage. The relationship between you and your parents, and seeing that in the book, is beautiful. And we all love our Hoyas, you know, we are here, Hoy man, always. Hoya is mum, just to get translation. But it's really beautiful that you've selected a passage about your father, and I'd love to know why this passage and what it means to you to relive every moment with him in this book.
Yeah, I think because even me as a former refugee who was reporting on the refugee crisis, I always think of the very immediacy of their needs now, you know, their need for citizenship, their need for housing, the need to access healthcare. So often we never think about what they had left behind, what they had given up to come here. We see them as, I mean, thankfully I don't, or the people I work with, but they're often seen as scroungers, seen as undeserving, or just seen as taking this extraordinary journey, you know, to leave home on a whim. The reason why I'm so drawn back to this passage is because I realise I've not seen my father in his home country ever. I've never seen him in a city in which he's completely comfortable, he speaks the language, he's part of the community, he knows the roads intimately. He doesn't walk with that baggage of displacement. I mean, to be able to see our parents like that, it's just generally such a joyful thing that I'd been robbed of my entire life. So it was really being able to reconnect with my father in that manner was such a beautiful thing. My father had left so much, and it wasn't a decision he came to easily to flee, even as, you know, bombs were raining down and there was so much shelling, and it was just becoming quite clear that the devastation was only going to get worse. My dad was quite reluctant to leave, and it was really the pushing of my grandfather and my mum was pregnant with me in my impending birth that made him make that decision, okay, we have to go. And I explored that a lot in the book, you know, how do you come to such a difficult decision of we've got to pack, we've got to leave, we don't know if we'll ever be able to come back, and we don't know where we're going to. So being able to see my dad for that was really moving, particularly as an adult now.
That's amazing, because there's so much you said that I want to unpack, and I'm like conscious of the time, but I really want to turn to the piece of like actually seeing your father in his hometown without the baggage. And I think that's really interesting, because a lot of us haven't been able to do that, go home, or our parents have unfortunately passed, or, you know, and I think I'd love to kind of return to you of like seeing him in the UK and seeing him in Somalia. What do you think was the biggest difference you saw him? Did he stand taller? Did he speak differently? What is that confidence you saw in him, and where did it show up?
Yeah. So in my family, I've got like loads of like quite formidable women. So it's amazing to see. And I wouldn't say my dad is shy or anything like that, but I wouldn't say he's like a massive chatterbox. And I think what was amazing to see in Somalia was he was just so much more confident than I'd seen him, and it was so much more life of the party in like a conversation. I think I saw my dad gossiping, which I've not really seen before. And he looked younger. He looked so much younger than I'd seen him before. His skin was just glowing. He looked just so beautiful and so happy. There was just almost childlike joy in showing me the city, even showing me, you know, the tiles in the house that my dad went back to rebuild his family home and the family hotel, and even in the way he would say, this is the tile that my father had, this is the tile from the 1960s, was just such a beautiful thing to see, because could see that he was so desperately reaching for the past, and in small glimpses I was finally able to see it, and I just felt like he looked lighter as a person as a result of it. But he just looked so happy. I've not seen my dad that happy before. So yeah, it was a great honour, like you were saying. Not all of us get to see our parents like that, and then not all. And I just hope if you do have the opportunity, I'll say take it.
So this book is like therapy to a lot of us. I'm not gonna lie. I read it and I was like, oh God, I gotta put it down for a second. I gotta go take a walk. But something you touched upon here is like your father's need to rebuild, or desire, or duty, I think you called it in the book, to rebuild and to go home and like craft that. And you touched upon it here that he was really proud to show you the city and the tiles. Yeah. I'd love to kind of understand from you, like, this sense of duty that he had. Do you have that sense of duty to rebuild? And if so, is it your book? Is that the starting point?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful question. Definitely, my father, among all his siblings, always saw it as his role, his duty to go back and to rebuild the hotel. And as he says to me, rebuild his father's legacy that had been destroyed during the war. There's great sadness that my granddad has not been alive to see that, but I'm just incredibly proud of him, so proud to be his daughter. So I felt like, okay, well, I too have a duty. I'm not, able to rebuild anything, but I can do what I do best, which is tell stories. So definitely just saw about how do we pass on what happened to us and what the lessons we had learned, and the joy that we still carry with us to the next generation. For him, is that very physical thing, which is that, our house, and I hope one day I can show my children or my children's children. But for me, it was also, I want to be able to just point to Scattered yes. and be like, this is my part in this.
Amazing, and it's a great part, I'm going to say. It's interesting because you talked about your dad being like confident and like had this like swagger about him, and it's really interesting because there's a part in the book where he actually is your translator.
Yes.
So as a young child, when you come here, just for reference for everybody, you end up being the translator to your parents. That's kind of like part and part of the parcel. You come to the UK, they're like, quickly learn that English so you can help us navigate the doctor and the teachers. And mate, when my mum didn't know some English, right? I was like, I got an A, mum. I have no... And my mum was like, I understand, right? I'm just making you translate for fun. But anyways, yeah, I'm not happy. I'd love to kind of understand from you how it felt that you were on the other side this time round. Yeah.
Yeah, it was absolutely amazing. That was probably the funnest day in Mogadishu, where I was, as part of the book, I'm interviewing different people, different creatives, and I said to my dad, I've not been able to find a published author because I want to understand the publishing process a little bit more. And I think the reason why I was doing that was just to figure out, well, who would Aamna have been if she remained in the city? Would I have been a writer? Would I have been an author? And I think I would have, but I call my dad, and then he just walks into a bookshop, picks up 2 books, gets the bookseller to call the authors. I'm like, what is happening? And then one of them's like, yeah, come, I'm a banker, but I'll see you during lunch. So he's a fantastic fixer as well. And it's while there where, so I spoke Somali fluently, and one of the losses that I write about in the books, I don't speak Somali very well at all, and I'm learning and I'm trying to get much better. But so he had to sit there and translate for me, and it was the first time that had really happened, and it was also the first time he had seen me doing my job as a journalist. It's also in the book. I don't even bother to do anything but just literally write word for word what was happening because it was so funny. Just me trying to talk to this banker, my dad's there, my dad's friends there, all 3 of them are called Mohammed, so it's trying to find the way to distinct them in the chapter was quite funny, and just really funny, like my dad's just like interrupting him, and I'm like trying to give him a look like, just don't let him talk, and every time he'll say something he'll just be like, wow, mashallah, he's amazing, isn't he? Which was brilliant to see. And even in the middle of the interview, the guy was saying, he wants to translate his books into English, and my dad goes, "She can do it." I'm like sitting there, like, it was just fun. I felt a bit like a child actually, which is because when you talked about being translated for your family, sometimes people do that very young, and you can grow up much quicker than you should. But it was quite fun to just kind of be completely in his car, and he was like driving the show. But it remains the most bizarre and hilarious interview I've ever done, and it's probably one of the funniest bits of the book for sure.
It's actually hilarious, and like read it twice, and I was like, that's still funny the second time round. I have a million questions, but I know I'm getting stared at. So this has been an incredible conversation. The only thing I'm going to touch upon before you take the mic away from me is the book is available to buy it twice on Audible and also in hardback because it's great on a bookshelf. The other thing I also want to mention is what the book we haven't touched upon, which we wanted to touch upon, is the mental health and how this book really does go through the struggle of Somali people and how we see and view mental health. And just giving you a warning here, like, it is a great book, it's fantastic, but there is also a lot here to work through. So work through it, have conversations with each other, talk to each other, like, really genuinely find yourself as a community and like talk about this book because it will help you kind of progress into yourself as well.